In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Welcome again to the Shrine of Our Lady of Mercy, Penrose Park, as we begin again our first Saturday devotions. For my little reflection on Our Lady this morning, I want to talk about Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a miraculous image of Our Lady from Mexico. This is actually something I've wanted to do a talk on for quite some time. I actually started preparing a talk on Our Lady of Guadalupe a couple of years ago. I read a whole book on her, put together all the notes, but then I never actually wrote the talk or delivered it. So today I finally get to do something that I've wanted to do for a while. The image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which I hope most people have at least seen, shows the image of Our Lady as a young mezita. That means a woman of mixed race. That was the local term for a woman of mixed race, right? She's displayed in a pink dress with a blue-green cloak. She also wears a belt around her waist, which is significant because it's done in the traditional style of a native pregnant woman. So in the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the depiction is something one of the natives would have instantly picked up as somebody that's pregnant. And she stands upon a half moon in the style of the woman in the Book of Revelation. So if you remember the Book of Revelation, where it talks about this woman clothed with the sun, standing on the moon, 12 stars around her head, a lot of the imagery in the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe follows upon that image. I think Our Lady particularly chose that style because it also appealed in particular way to those of the Aztec paganism, because they had a very strong worship of the sun and the moon. And so she takes upon that imagery and says, I am before these, I am replacing these. But before I talk about the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe too much further, I want to just go into a basic outline of the events where Our Lady revealed herself to Saint John Diego. In this part of my talk, I'm actually very freely copying from a summary of the events that's used as the description of the chapel of Our Lady of Guadalupe up at our other shrine of Marion Valley. It's got a very nice summary of the events in the description of that chapel on the little sign outside. So I thought, since I couldn't find or put together something better myself, here's a summary of those events leading up to the Our Lady giving us this miraculous image. So on the 9th of December in the year 1531 is when this starts. So in the early morning, John Diego, who was a Christian convert, was on his way to attend Mass 4 kilometers distance at Tlatelolco, once an Aztec center and the place where the final battle of the Spanish conquest had taken place 10 years earlier. Suddenly, on his way, John Diego heard beautiful music and a woman's voice calling him to the top of Tepeyac Hill. At the top of the hill, he saw a radiant, beautiful woman who revealed to him that he was the Virgin Mary, and instructed him to go to the bishop and tell him that a shrine should be built in her honor at the bottom of that hill. John Diego immediately continued on his way to Tlatelolco, to the palace of the Bishop John de Zumarraga, a Franciscan friar. The bishop received John Diego kindly, but was initially reluctant to believe his story. A discouraged John Diego went back to Tepeyac Hill and found the Virgin again and told her about his failure to convince the bishop of her request. Our Lady directed him to go back to the bishop and repeat the request again. So the next day, which is then the 10th of December and a Sunday, John Diego returned to the bishop's residence again. The bishop asked him many questions and then told John Diego he needed some sort of sign to believe that it really was the Heavenly Lady who had been sent to him. So John Diego returns to the Virgin Mary and told her of the bishop's request, and she promised to fulfill the bishop's request the next day when he returned to Tepeyac Hill. Our Lady, when she gets challenged in these apparitions, you'll see the theme at Fatima or Lourdes. She gets challenged, and something miraculous happens. At Fatima, she gets challenged. We have the day the sun danced. At Our Lady of Guadalupe, she gets challenged, she does something. So the next day was then the 11th of December, and John Diego failed actually to keep his appointment with Our Lady because his uncle had become gravely ill. John Diego had spent the day trying to look for someone with medical skills to care for his uncle, but had failed to find anyone, and told his dying uncle that instead he would go to Telecoco the next morning and bring the priest to hear his confession and give him the last rites. So the next morning, John Diego is hurrying towards Telecoco to find the priest for his dying uncle. Thinking it better not to let the lady interrupt him, not a very good plan, on his mission of mercy, he tried to avoid her by going round to the other side of Tepeyac Hill. Didn't work. Our Lady was there to meet him. Right? She listened to his excuses for not keeping his appointment, but told him, "Your uncle will not die of his sickness. Be assured that he is healthy." Right? John Diego was greatly relieved and believed Our Lady and followed the lady's instruction to go to the top of the hill and gather flowers that he would find there. That very morning, Our Lady also appeared to his uncle and cured him. So his uncle also had an apparition of Our Lady that morning, and he was fully cured to health. Right, at the top of the hill, he discovered a miraculous garden of roses. This was in winter, so no roses at all time, right? They also don't grow there normally. So that there were roses there at all was miraculous. So he gathered the roses and took them to Our Lady, who arranged them in his mantle, or tilma. The tilma is the name for the cloth that the native Mexican people wore. And instructed him to take them to the bishop as a sign he had requested. Once in the bishop's presence, John Diego opened his tilma to show the bishop the roses. The roses fell to the floor, and the beautiful portrait of Our Lady appeared on the coarse fabric of the tilma. The bishop and his whole household were filled with amazement, and before long, the temple that Our Lady had requested, the church, was built in honor of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So that's a basic outline of the events. So the couple of days where Our Lady appeared to John Diego and made this insistent request that a church be built in Our Lady's honor at the foot of that hill. What's maybe very important and what's often overlooked when people talk about Our Lady of Guadalupe, people love to talk about the miraculous nature of the image, which I will talk about soon as well. But maybe the greatest miracle then of it was the aftermath of what it did for the Catholic faith in the Americas, right? And the result of the apparition really displays Our Lady's intent on why she appeared there at all, right? So after the apparition that John Diego has, and this miraculous image has been made on his tilma, which gets put in that church that's built, he spent the rest of his long life, John Diego lived to 84 years old, spreading the faith to his fellow natives, right? And the result of this was nothing short of miraculous. Because up until this point, very few had actually converted. Most of the baptisms had been done to children, particularly orphan children that the various missionaries were trying to look after. Adults had mostly resisted any efforts to convert them to the faith, right? They were very strong in holding on to their traditional pagan religion and no matter what the effort the missionaries were putting in, they weren't changing that. They were sticking to their faith, their religion, and they were having nothing of these Spanish conquerors that were trying to bring them Christ. After the apparition of Our Lady began the largest mass conversion in the history of the Church. The largest mass conversion in the history of the Church was after Our Lady appeared to St. John Diego and gave us this image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Over 9 million were converted in just a few years. That's the biggest miracle that we should all remember of this apparition of Our Lady. Right? There are reports from this time of some missionaries doing thousands of baptisms in a day. One missionary, it's believed, unfortunately I didn't write his name down, he's believed to hold the record for the most baptisms ever done by one priest. He is believed to have baptized almost 1 million souls. So there was a massive, massive amount of conversions that happened very, very rapidly. The missionaries could hardly keep up with the amount of requests for baptisms, confirmations, marriages, etc. in the years that followed. And really, when we should think of this, we should think that Our Lady is the one responsible for the largest conversion in history. At the same time where Europe's going through the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Church is losing millions of souls there. Catholic Church lost about 5 million souls during this time to the Protestant Reformation. 9 million, almost double the amount, came into the church through Our Lady. And this is an important message, I think, for today, to remember that Our Lady can powerfully influence the world. And we should be praying that she does so again in our own country, in our own time, to again bring people to Christ. She's done so before, and she's responsible for the largest conversion to Catholicism ever in history. And it was done when she appeared to John Diego and gave this image of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Now, of course, onto the miraculous nature of the image. This is what people normally think of when they think of Our Lady of Guadalupe, though those that know about it normally focus on this. And it's wonderful because it shows the image as a persisting miracle, a lasting miracle, something that you can go and point to and say, that is a miracle that it's ongoing from Christ. And people love reading about this and love talking about this. But I think as much as this is important as a continued witness to Our Lady and God's presence in the world, I think the more important thing is actually that moment of conversion. But I'll still talk about this because it's a continued witness and testimony of that apparition that had such a change of heart for the Aztecs that came to the faith. So the first miraculous thing about the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe is it even still exists. Right? Just its existence is a miracle in itself. See, the image is on John Diego's tilma. Right? The tilma is the Aztec outer garment for men. And it was made of a coarse fabric from the threads of the marguerite cactus plant. Right? The lifespan of such fabric is normally only about 20 years. So it's not a very well-wearing garment in a sense. It's enough, it's going to last you, half your adult life if you're wearing it, but it's not something that is going to last forever. The cloth is still there after 500 years, so it's way, way beyond its normal span of its life. And that's despite not being in great conditions. There wasn't actually an effort put in to preserve it. Right? The original chapel that it was built in which it stayed in for at least 150 years, I can't remember the exact time, I didn't write it down. The original chapel was damp and it was open and had open windows. And we're talking about something built in the tropics where, damp, humid, hot weather. Not something great for the preservation of a material made of natural fibers, right? Also, it was exposed. The glass panel that we see in front of it today, that was put in much, much later, right? So for those original years, it was exposed to smoke and insects from votive candles. Smoke normally has the effect of permanently darkening a painting. Think of Our Lady of the Black Madonna icon. That's been partly darkened permanently from the exposure to votive candles and all of that. And also that candle smoke, it has a lot of corrosive compounds in it, various things that normally eat into things. But there's been no effect on the colour of the icon and no effect on the cloth. Also, during this original time, with no thought given to the preservation of the image, a lot of people are allowed to touch it, and that should have had a great effect on wearing it thin. If you've been to some places like Lourdes, and you've seen places where pilgrims touch a lot, even stone gets worn away. An even stronger example is if you go to St. Peter's, there is a statue of St. Peter. Right, it's a brass, I think, or bronze statue, bronze, I think. Right, and people have touched the foot of that so much that they've had to replace that bronze foot several times, just with people touching it so much. That was done to this very fragile cloth, and again, no visible effect upon it. Added to this is a couple of disasters in the history of the icon. One was in 1791. A workman that was cleaning the frame around the icon spilt a bottle of nitric acid on the image. So again, something that would normally have a noticeable lasting effect. Luckily, it only left a faint watermark. So nitric acid spilt should have destroyed some of the cloth, some of the colouring. Faint watermark was all that's left of that. Then there's the incident of the 1921 bomb that was put before the image. So at this time, Mexico had been taken over by kind of a communist regime that was actively persecuting the church. They didn't want to actually shut down Guadalupe, because they were fearing a massive backlash, so they came up with this other plan in part of their persecution of the church, just to put a bomb there, have the bomb go off, everything would be destroyed, and then this whole problem of this being the heart of Catholicism in Mexico would just go away. So they put a timed bomb there, disguised in a vase of a bunch of flowers that was put right before the icon, and it went off. A couple of amazing things. Nobody died from the bomb. Apparently it ripped chunks of marble out of the altar. It blew all the windows out of the church. It brent the crucifix that sits on the altars. They had a big crucifix, kind of like the one that we've moved back there because we're about to have adoration. They had that on the altar. That was bent, right over. The icon, the image itself, no damage at all. Didn't even get a crack on the glass in front of it, even though it was right at the epicenter of the blast that, threw chunks of marble out of the altar. So, amazing moment where, the image should have been destroyed. It didn't. So in general, except for a few later additions of gold or silver to the image, which are not in great condition, the original image is still as it was on the day when it was first seen. And after almost 500 years, right? After almost 500 years, that's pretty miraculous. That this image is still with us, perfectly preserved to the current day. Scientific studies on this image of Our Lady of Guadalupe have revealed other very hard to explain qualities, revealing what none of the faithful really needed to be told, but which others will never believe, that the image is indeed miraculous. If you ever look at these things online, they'll always say it's controversial, because the faithful believe it and then the scientists can't explain it. But for us, we always just see the miraculous. There's been a number of scientific studies on it. Now, I will go through some of the claims about this image that the book that I've been reading has all the footnotes for. There's a lot of other claims that are more fabulous, but because of limited time and also because I couldn't find a named study to back up some of the more incredible claims, I won't actually include them today, but if you're interested, there are quite a number of other very marvellous claims that are made about this image. But here's just a few that at least are fixed on a hard science that they can't explain. So the first study I'd like to reference is in 1936, Fritz Hahn was part of his study of the icon, the image. He was given two fibers, right? One was red, one was yellow. But despite taking them to a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, he was actually able to find no evidence of any pigmentation in those fibers. And this is one of the things that has kind of confused scientists in all their studies of the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, is that they're not actually sure how it's coloured. It's a very confusing thing. A further study then in 1946 that put the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe under a microscopic examination found that there were no brushstrokes. So the image was not painted on. So again, this is what we already know because of the story from John Diego about him and how the image arrived, but there are no brushstrokes. It's not painted on, and the science backs that claim up. Also of great interest has been the discovery, when the image has been photographed, that there's reflections of a number of people in Our Lady's eyes. So if you get a really powerful camera, really focus in on her eyes, you can actually see the image of several people in Our Lady's eyes. These images are distorted following the law of optics, and the reflections show John Diego standing before the bishop, who's with another man. That other man has since been identified as Jon Gonzalez, who was the bishop's interpreter. So in Our Lady's eyes, there are these three men, all of which have been identified. One thing of particular note about these reflections, and the marvellous part of them being included in this image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, is that the reflections, like this in an eyeball, were only confirmed by science 350 years after. So in the 1880s was when science actually became aware that you can find, when you photograph an eye, the reflections in the eye in this manner. So no one at the time when this image came into existence knew about this phenomena. Well, no person did. God did, of course. God put them there just to baffle us when the time came. Another study then in 1978 using infrared light, which is typically used to reveal the underlayers of image. So when you hear about these studies of an image and they're talking about layers under the paint and all of this thing, they're normally using infrared light, right? And this reveals that there is no underdrawing. You know how an artist might sketch out the image beforehand. That's not there. There's no sizing. I had to actually look up what that meant online. So you know when you get a piece of canvas that you're going to paint on, it normally has that chalky stuff on it. That's called the sizing. It has two purposes. One, to protect the fibers from the paint, which can actually corrode the fibers and destroy them and make them break down faster. But also to give a smooth painting service. There's none of that there. It's painted directly onto the coarse fibers of the tilma. And there's also no protective over-varnishing, which would normally lead to that cracked effect you see on old paintings, you know, when the old painting is cracked and peeling and all of that. There's no protective over-varnish to stop that happening, right? So that was what that study confirmed. So basically, all of this would make the image much harder to draw or paint, and it would cause it to degrade much faster. It's done in the worst way possible if you want the image to actually last any period of time. They also had a lot of trouble explaining the pink and blue pigments. Most of the compounds that you'd be used for this typically fade very quickly. And the colours would be gone. But they're still as bright and vibrant as ever. So the only way to explain this, I think, is if you're using artificial dyes and colourings, but they weren't invented for another 200-something years, so they're out of the picture. As I said before, there's many other fabulous, miraculous claims that people make about the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, but I'm going to leave them out, both because I couldn't find actual scientific studies to back them up, and also because I'm almost out of time. But this image is and remains a lasting miracle for anyone that cares to give it attention. It's one of those moments where you could say, that's a miracle that is, was, and continues to be for anyone that wants to look for God's miraculous presence in the world. It's one of many cases, but it is that lasting miracle that defies anyone without faith to explain it, and of course doesn't need to be explained to anybody with faith. But again, the science is great there because it backs up the claim. This wasn't painted. This was miraculously created. But also I really want to draw that attention to why Our Lady came to and gave us this image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in the first place. And that was the greatest miracle that Our Lady of Guadalupe ever performed, and that was the conversion to Christ started among the people. The largest conversion moment in the history of the church. And we need to pray hard that Our Lady does that again in our world. That she again, through grace, brings people to faith in Christ. Our Lady always points people to her Son. And that's what she did when she appeared in Mexico almost 500 years ago and gave us this miraculous image. She used it as a moment to point people to Christ. And that's the lasting legacy of that apparition, the conversion of the people of South America to Christ. And now as we go into our time for silent adoration, in accordance with Our Lady's request at Fatima on the first Saturdays of the month, she asks us to meditate upon one of the mysteries of the Rosary. And since in the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady is with child, I'm going to suggest that you spend at least 15 minutes now, if you aren't going to confession, meditating upon the first joyful mystery, where the angel comes to Our Lady and begins the mysteries of salvation that we contemplate through Our Lady's prayer.